Um, we have a full agenda, and we have an hour and a half. So my comments are really, I just wanted to share with the committee that we did sign the contract, and I wanted to thank obviously town council, but also Jeff and Dan for their assistance on that. And going forward, we're going to have Jeff and Dan and Jim Palin are going to be kind of reviewing the invoices as they come in. So thank you for your help there. Next item is an update from Department of Public Works. Ed?
I'm not touching that again. All right, thank you very much. Just took some quick notes, and I'll turn this right back over to Reed Hildebrand so we can get going with the presentation. First topic is our Great Island Access Driveway. We did award the contract to Burns Construction in the amount of $1.5 million. There will be some alternatives chosen also, an additional $150,000. So we're about almost at 1.7 right now with the total. We do have a tentative schedule to start our work mid-September. We'll be posting signage out front for no public access Monday through Friday. We'll have authorized personnel only. It will be opened up to the residents that live on the site there to have access, but while they're working during the week, we're going to shut it down. We did post the trees that are out there. If you haven't been out there, you'll see them. We have a 10-day waiting period. If there are no protests, then the trees will be removed. If there are some protests, we will have a public hearing as quick as we possibly can to move that part of the project along. When we have better and a firm date of start, I will send out a press release to everyone and anyone, and we'll post it on the website. Also post it on site, so the people that do visit the site, they'll see it. Orchard remediation. The plans are into P&Z. The bid will be posted next week, but the P&Z hearing is the 3rd, decision by September 10th. And then we'll open up the bids on the 19th. So after that point in time, I'll be able to schedule the work out there. We have some spot remediation to do. I'll be working with the contractor on that to possibly get them done around the same time. Soil delivery for that project for the orchard. I have 2 sources right now. Generally, I have none. I have 2. So we're working with the school project and with our roadway project contractor to see if we can get some material for free.
Which would help the town
either way.
Twice, yes.
Yep. So see if I can spread the wealth a little bit. And finally, and which I heard we'll be speaking about tonight, access prep. I do have slated right now a portion of that driveway to get paved by the greenhouse. I want to get that done if we're going to open up to the public. It's a safety issue. I have a contractor that's paving right now, so I'm trying to work out those details. Bridle trail, lawn area depressions, and so on. I hope we get to speak about that a little bit more so that I can get some better direction on where you'd like me to focus my attention before the 21st.
So Ed, we had talked about on the trees, because everybody loves trees and taking them down is the last thing we want to do, but we need to do that. So how can we repurpose that wood?
I have a bid alternate in there to take 20-foot lengths of some of those trees and store them. The contractor is fully on board. He actually gave us a couple milling companies locally that he uses to do some of this type of work. So we'll take it, we'll store it. We have to store it for about 6 months before we can mill it. We have a section area on site right now that we plan to use to do that, and store some of the other things that we're pulling out of the site, too, the cobbles or the other ones. So
Maybe picnic tables?
whatever you'd like, we'll get some prices to do that. But we plan to repurpose some of that wood.
Okay. Any questions for Ed? Okay, thanks, Ed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a big team from Reed Hildebrand here with us today.
this evening, and we also met down at the, on the island with even more team members. So thank you for meeting with us down there. And now I'm going to kick it off to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica. We are very happy to be with you all again tonight. We got to spend most of the afternoon today on the island with our very full team. And it could not have been more beautiful, basically. And I think the more we get to know that island, the less we want to leave that island. And actually, George, who will be speaking shortly, made a really nice observation as we were having a speed dinner before joining you this evening. He said that time seems to shift some on the island. And I think that's something that we're going to want to preserve and keep. But sort of when you're there, it really feels like you don't want to leave. And so we really got to live that as a large team today. And I want to share that the reason we had quite so many people is that we are all kicking off our sort of what we call a analysis and discovery phase of work. So what we're sharing with you tonight in terms of sort of little snapshots of a not even really preliminary understanding, but we are on a deeper level with our full team now trying to do all of the homework that needs to be done to help the whole community make responsible decisions. So the Reed Hildebrand part of the team got an early start, but we got our signed contract at the start of this week. And so all our sub-consultants are newly, truly on board and beginning their due diligence and really kind of thorough scrutiny. So we have a group of them with us tonight. Larger portions of their full team were on site with us today because there's nothing like being on the island to understand the island. So some of those folks are with us tonight, and they'll each sort of introduce themselves and give a little preview of what we're looking at. I want to share too, though, that we had a fuller team because we're so excited looking ahead to the public engagement effort a month from now, September 21st, on the island, where we really are excited to meet here at Town Hall and share a bunch of ideas and information with people in the morning, and then in the afternoon for as many people as we can get to the island to share with them and workshop both in an experiential and sort of information sharing way possible futures and new understandings about the island itself. And so we were sort of party planning, so to speak, for that event and trying to organize what we hope will be a really memorable and very, very fun afternoon. What will be late September, God bless you. And so that's one of the reasons we had such a sort of swarm on the island today. And with that, in the room we have, and on the screen you can see Becca, me from Reed Hildebrand, my colleague Meg Griscom, who's the project manager, also at the table, Ted Marchant, who is our assist and really quite, I would say, like an amateur ecologist who is part of our team at Reed Hildebrand. And then from outside of Reed Hildebrand, here in the room with us and many speaking, we have Brian, who those of you who were at our interview will remember from Langen. We have George Knight, our architect, and we have Ben Margolis here to talk about governance and revenue and programming options. And then Carrie, who's sitting over there, she won't be speaking, but she is going to help us manage time because we imagine that there's going to be lots of conversation and we want to get everyone home on time tonight. And so then with that, if we go to the next, I'm going to begin the conversation tonight by talking a little bit about access. I think as a shared goal, there's this incredible island. It has all these sort of magical conditions on it. And so how we create access to all those wonderful conditions for as many people as possible while doing no damage is one of the great challenges that we're tackling with this vision process and that the committee has as its major mandate. And so we're beginning to understand all the pros and cons and all the possibilities. Stepping back, and we talked about this a little bit before, it's not 100% a true island, but it's as close to that as you can possibly get, right? It does there is a tender connection to the mainland. But I think for the most part, it really feels like a full island. And I think what that connection is, I don't know, I think it's probably arguable if it's officially an island or if it touches down, and that's something we've been asking. Because it's an island, you know, this big project that they were just talking about to make it safe and to provide fire access and to actually allow the public to get there is of the utmost priority. And then we're going to be looking at questions like, can we have bikes? And if we have bikes, what does that mean and where do they go? And I know an animated conversation with the community, are more than humans allowed onto the island other than sort of wildlife species? So are we going to let dogs onto the island? And if so, how and why and where? And so those are some of the, I think, very important questions. Walkability is challenging from even para-island, for many people. And so I think we love the idea of people being able to walk to the island. We love the idea that walking is maybe the primary experience on the island. But we've been really starting to understand how we can get people there in routes other than walking. So if we go to the next slide. We've been trying to understand, and this is something that we're interested in, sort of how much time can you spend on the island just walking? And so this is some of the loops that are open now, right? If you do the red loop that's dashed here, which is open to the public now, it's, you know, just over a mile, and it's just under a half an hour for most people to do that walk, which is a pretty great experience. And then, you know, there's the other paved route, which has the green dash, which if you add on, takes you over 30 minutes. And I think what we're incredibly excited to announce tonight is the opening of the bridle path for people, which takes you into that northeastern lobe. And that has been an area, because of the sensitivity of the condition, that there's been some caution about opening up to the public, but there's been a lot of due diligence done recently, and there's confidence from a kind of ecology point of view and from a safety point of view that we can open the bridle paths. And so that allows us to basically open almost a whole other half a mile of walking trails to the public. So for those of you who are listening, and I think in terms of a news item for tonight, basically there's around a month of almost everyday access to go see that part of the island if you haven't, and we want to encourage people to get out there and enjoy that before construction begins. The island will continue to be open on the weekends while the construction, which is what Ed was just talking about. And so this is like what we're showing on this drawing and what we're talking about is the way that the island is accessible now, and everything that we look at from here is going to be about how we expand access from this moment. Let's go to the next. Some of the options that got cut off a little bit, but some of the options that we're going to be looking more closely at, and we talked about last month with you, are, is there a Darien or a Great Island trolley, for instance, or even two of them that run in a circuit? Is there a small ferry that could stop at the dock and sort of share? Right now the fireboat is there, but with some changes to the infrastructure there to make it a little bit more safe, it's very imaginable that there's a way for a boat service to be provided. Mentioned the bikes and the cars already. We're open to more imaginative means of getting to the island, to scooters, and there are many different cities that have tested and proven success with different kinds of access other than just cars. Next. So we had shared last time we were together some of the options that we're considering and continuing to try and understand a little bit more for parking. And that study is sort of underway. I think to date, as we've done more knowledge gathering from our last conversation, there is nothing that has come forward that sort of has disproved any of these potential options that we have on the map here. And just to share with people who maybe can't see what I'm talking about, we have looked at possible parking areas and the sizes that they could offer by the greenhouse, by the stables, by the manor house, in the Great Lawn area, by the dock and boathouse, and then a smaller possible area as you come sort of around the causeway. And there are pros and cons with each of those options. There are flooding challenges with some, there are historic preservation questions, there's beautiful trees in some cases that we might have to consider working around or even removing one or two of in some of these options. So we don't yet have a position about whether we want to endorse any of these solutions, but I can share at the moment there's nothing that has come forward to say you absolutely can't consider any of these options to date. So I think the one thing that we shared at the last meeting is the idea of putting up to 200 or 240 spots in the Great Lawn is something that I think we would only recommend as a temporary option for like a big event for the town. We think it's unlikely that the community will vote to put a permanent parking lot there and pave that because it's just so beautiful the way it is now. But it is something that we'll be doing more consideration of next. Something we wanted to begin looking at more closely, even though there's a yes or no to be evaluated about whether or not we even allow bikes on the island, is if we do and we don't build out new infrastructure, we try and repurpose existing infrastructure. What might those loops look like? So this is a kind of conservative look at how you might enable a little bit of bike use. Next. And then I think we've talked about the trolley option. I think if we do something, we're imagining we wouldn't take people too far into the island except for special occasions. So there's one option where you drop people off sort of at the cul-de-sac, other option where you take them up to just the greenhouse, and then I think the stables are a really, sort of celebratory and iconic place for the island, and so we're also considering that as an option. Next. Water access is, I would say, very much under study, and the shellfish beds and the sort of overlapping constituencies and regulations are still something that we're really, I would say, understanding. But we're interested in whether or not there is paddleboarding or kayaking on the north shore in some way, or do we just sort of try and locate all the boat activity on the south? And so options 1 and 2, I think looking more closely at the dock today, our inclination is that probably wants to be kept entirely for public use for a sort of safety and management point of view. But the boathouse really seems to have a lot of potential for wider kinds of use and water access.
So, wait, so
Yeah.
Becky, do you mean down by the dock just for the emergency?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's. I think again, like I want to say again and again today that we are at the start of really trying to test and understand things, but in a very preliminary way. It feels like the dock is for more serious boat use, and opening that up to a much broader public use more private public use might be complicated. So we're not going to take it off the table entirely, but it's seeming like that's a little bit more complicated than we were initially thinking. Is that helpful?
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, moving on to infrastructure. Again, I'm Brian Phillips with Langen. Wanted to give kind of a brief overview of what we've uncovered so far in terms of infrastructure, and starting with the utility work surrounding the island. There is the roadway project for the access drive and the work associated with that, as well as as part of a prior project, there was a past thought to develop the island, subdivide it, and as part of that project, some utilities were brought down both Ziggy's Way as well as Great Island Road, and those included 8-inch water mains for both domestic water and fire protection, as well as some low-pressure sanitary sewer mains. And essentially, the thought was that each structure on the island could potentially have their own pump for their sanitary sewer flow, connect to those low-pressure water mains. With the work in the surrounding island, there's also some infrastructure on the island itself. There is what we believe is either a 6-inch or a 2-inch water main, which loops around the island and serves domestic water for the structures on site currently. There is electric service from Great Island Road, which serves most of the structures at this point, as well as we believe that each building has its own septic tank, septic system. So it's a little unclear at this point, the condition of those utilities on the island. Some of them, might be incorporated into the proposed futures, depending on the type of uses for these individual buildings. And then, we do have those utilities in the road that could be connected to, for instance, with the sanitary sewer. Depending on, the futures of these buildings, for instance, there's a higher demand for, say, an event space versus, a more passive use, such as a museum, educational type of building. So there could be an opportunity to reuse some of these, existing septic tanks and, septic systems as opposed to installing pumps. So it could be an integrated approach, looking at each building separately. And then, moving on a little bit to the coastal resources, obviously, of which there are many. And, we're looking at some rocky shorefronts here. In addition to that, in terms of resources, there's tidal wetlands, coastal flood areas. And, the idea is identifying these spaces, which they have been, and sort of integrating the proposed development, be it, new structures, new walking paths or infrastructure, and working it around some of these existing resource areas. Understanding what makes sense to do in a floodplain, what might make sense keeping away from the wetland areas, and then understanding the regulated areas associated with each. So that'll play into the possible futures of the island as well. Ted?
So moving on to the ecology, I think anybody who's been to the island or even heard it spoken of knows that the richness and diversity of the plant and animal communities on Great Island is one of the things that makes it truly special. And so the intention here is to give a brief and high-level introduction to the ecology of Great Island. The next step is obviously, as Becca alluded to, really mobilizing and getting the site and historical analysis done. And that's what's really going to allow us to develop a design strategy with an overall goal of ensuring responsible stewardship, which really means maintaining and enhancing the ecological function and the biodiversity without compromising access or activities unnecessarily. So, generally speaking, ecosystems can be defined by scale. Long Island Sound is a historically tremendously biodiverse ecosystem because of its range of habitats and communities. It's a designated estuary of national significance, and it is of massive recreational and economic importance to the communities that surround it. Great Island itself is an ecological community that functions within the context of Long Island Sound, and it has analogs throughout the sound itself. And then zooming in further, within Great Island, there are several ecological typologies, sort of semi-discrete areas that are defined by the interactions between the plants, animals, and the specific characteristics of the local environment. And preliminary site analysis and site visits suggest that there are several ecological typologies that appear to be present on the island, and perhaps more than might be expected given the size of the island, which again is one of the things that makes it so special. The major ecological groupings range from maritime woodlands in the upland areas to tidal wetlands and rocky intertidal areas along the shoreline. The maritime woodlands, with sort of varying degrees of modification or management that have occurred over time, are typified by a dense and stratified canopy. So that's mature trees, saplings, shrubs, and ground cover. And there are also likely upland freshwater wetlands in those areas. Not pictured here, but occupying the remaining upland areas are the managed grasslands and gardens, where most of the human activity on the island has historically occurred. And these are typified by a wide range of canopy coverage, from basically no trees to a very dense canopy, but the understory is open and actively managed. And then there are also along the coastal shoreline tidal flats, wetlands, and rocky intertidal. I should mention that in the maritime woodlands, we also know that there's a bald eagle nest. which is a very much a charismatic species, one that can is popular, is well known, and is captivating, and can really be a catalyst for design and for the community. Moving back to the shoreline, tidal flats, tidal wetlands, and the rocky intertidal areas that are characterized by varying degrees of modification or management depending on where on the island we are. But generally, they're all typified by the influence of brackish water, where fresh water and salt water meet, and the twice daily tides that we know we have. And in the context of Long Island Sound, these areas provide habitat for a wide range of different natural communities and plants and animals. And the varied history will likely present different opportunities for preservation, enhancement, and restoration. Again, the overarching goal being to maintain and increase ecological function and biodiversity. And so these opportunities for enhancement, for preservation, and for restoration will be explored through the upcoming analysis and design phases. But I think it's important to note, and generally we recognize, that Great Island can't be viewed in isolation. Ecosystems don't adhere to the property lines or political boundaries that we assign. They're part of dynamic systems. And any changes or modifications to any part of Great Island, or no change at all, will impact the surrounding areas and vice versa. Additionally, as this slide shows, design needs to plan for the future. Great Island and Long Island Sound can't be viewed statically or in a time capsule, as this salt marsh advancement study that the town commissioned shows. Design needs to plan for multiple futures, and effective and responsible stewardship really requires considering Great Island within the broader context to ensure the best possible outcomes to maintain or improve the ecosystem services that benefit the community. And that really creates an opportunity to demonstrate stewardship that will then create potential and opportunities for ecological education at all levels, be it scholastic or community organization based. And it also provides an opportunity for the town of Darien to continue to demonstrate its commitment to conservation and stewardship and environmental sustainability, all of which are central to our collective well-being. George?
I guess we thought we might pause here. I just want to say, like, we want to keep moving, but if you guys have questions, we know we're like sharing a lot of different things. So I don't know if you guys want to offer up any questions or comments right now. We could pause a little.
Sure. With regard to bike use, will you look at options related to the creation of just dedicated bike lanes like they have in like Manhattan? There are parts of the roadway where you can bike and where you cannot, and also consider bike use as a mode of transportation to get there exclusively, and perhaps the creation of an area where citizens could access the island via bike, park and lock their bikes, and then proceed on foot.
Straightforward answer is yes to both, and we've already begun looking at both.
Terrific.
And there are a lot of advantages that each of those two options open up. I think if we sway to the extreme end of sort of the topics that Ted was just speaking about, which is really bringing forward the sort of nature, doing your second option of trying to have bikes get you there, but then keeping it sort of more on foot and as quiet and low impact as possible is a great option. I think we also feel like something we've heard a lot about in these preliminary conversations is just making sure that the island stays really safe. And so separation of modes of transportation is one of the best ways to ensure safety. So we are looking at that as well.
Thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about the analysis you'll be doing to determine the viability of the different transit options?
That is a great question, and actually we are still looking into exactly how much we want to go down the various sort of research efforts. So right now to prepare for the community and sort of surveying, we're trying to understand how much investment is needed, the existing conditions, and I think everybody is aware that if you just adapt work that's already in place to your future, that's the most cost-effective, mostly when it comes to site way of proceeding. So at the moment, what we're doing is trying to explore if we just take what's already been disturbed and all the infrastructure that's there, and we pursue that to prepare the island. And then we look at trolley and we look at parking in those areas that are disturbed. And we look at both what are the costs to get people to make sense of that. I think as we focus on the best things, we have a whole pricing investigation that's part of this exercise. And so we'll put out to try and understand more fully what the costs of these sort of favored things are, but we haven't done that yet.
I would just add that I didn't see it in your example, but one of those sort of golf cart shuttles from Pear Tree Point parking lot seems like it would be worth exploring.
That's a great suggestion, thank you.
And while we're talking transportation, I mean, I think all these ideas are good, but they're all highly involved as far as like acquiring trolleys, paying people to drive them, golf carts and stuff. And so I was happy to see the parking ideas. I think that, you know, when we talked about low-hanging fruit and early wins, one of the things we should really consider is one of those spots, pick one of those spots and either label it a temporary trial parking spot. But then I think as we try to figure out what we're gonna do with the island as we move forward with the master plan, having some cars coming and going after the road is done will tell us a little bit about like, oh my gosh, it's packed every single day, or it's not that bad, you know, and without building a parking lot and doing that and then jumping headlong into trolleys and all the rest of the stuff, you know, I don't know. I just want to make sure that we try some parking.
I think we're very
Soon.
interested in how and when to try parking, and we've started talking about the various recipes for that, and we can keep doing that. There's a lot of, as you would expect, there's a lot of work happening to prepare between now and the community event on the 21st, and I think we know that the island will shut for this other work, but we also really are committed to getting as many people there to experience the island as quickly as possible. So between now and September 21st, if we feel like we can offer that as like a clear thing, we will be offering that potentially for just the weekends. We are still doing due diligence about whether or not we think we can offer something like that. We don't know. There's too many open questions right now.
Well, I think back as far as the parking goes,
Yeah.
we wouldn't actually have cars parking until the road work was done.
That's what I mean, right?
And
So-
the road work won't be done until, you know, the Christmas time.
Yeah.
But I think to Bruce's point, picking and penciling out a little bit more some of those smaller areas is
Yeah.
something that we can pursue as soon as the road work is done. is a
Yeah.
good idea.
Totally, and I'm sorry, so if I was confusing this, right, we know we can't expand access before the road work is done, but I think we are interested if there are some places that we could announce that those will be coming, so. There's something else you just said that I wanted to respond to related to parking. We were talking about it earlier.
Well,
If it comes
I
back,
think
I'll
about,
add
if I
it.
can just
Yeah.
piggyback on that access and the vehicles, you talked about repurposing the existing infrastructure for bikes. Is that plausible during this possible increased access period leading up to the workshops?
I think the answer to that is simply no.
No.
But I don't know if you would add anything. We asked a lot of questions about that. I think to keep everybody safe
Safety.
right now, it's too complex.
Should we consider not starting the road project until after the September 21st event?
You know, we thought about that, but I think the reason that we're having it, the island shut down during the week, except for tenants and townspeople, is because we want to get that done. So that's a real pinch point for us. So
But you were saying mid-September, right? Start, so we're talking like a week. Differential, I don't know what kind of mess it's going to look like when our first big group of people that we want to show off the island to show up. Just something to think about.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point, Dan. But I would also say on the other side that we've owned this property for a while, and people are, you know, they want to see progress, and they're going to see progress. But of course, I don't know, Ed, like realistically, Ed,
I can see.
Okay, realistically, sorry, Craig is in the way.
Trying to hide behind Greg.
So if you're talking mid-September, the road won't be ripped up by the 21st, correct? We'll just have machinery there, they're gonna start on the wall, right?
The conversation with the contractor was to start along the north side and start pulling the curb, the cobbles, and start to move that to the north while leaving the south section alone, so that it's safe and accessible to the folks that are coming and going during the weekends. So trees got to come out, stumps got to be pulled. They're going to start pulling the curbing, and they're going to start putting those walls in. That's the first thing that has to start.
But to your point, if it is just a difference of a week, and you are going to be having work being done where the road surface may be uneven, or there may be some less safe conditions to have people walking there, just depending on if it's a very short window of time, maybe worth consideration.
But aren't we transporting these people from here on a bus? So if we're just driving through the front gate, they're not even getting out of the shuttle until they get to the stables or something, right?
So we're jumping
So-
ahead, but for the 21st, the plan is to have one session here at Town Hall, obviously doesn't impact Great Island. The second section at Great Island, we will be hiring buses to take people, but we'll also encourage people to walk on themselves, and you can make your decision that day if you want to come out. So, but with all of that said, we are planning on keeping the island open on the weekend, and we will do that in make sure that's done in a safe way. Will there be equipment out there? Yes. But will we treat that day any differently than any other weekend? No, we will be looking to provide a safe environment for our community. So my personal is keep moving forward and let Ed proceed at his pace.
Beck, if I can ask, so we're focusing on this first workshop.
Yeah.
And how to get as many people on access with this expanded access in 4 weeks or whatever it is.
Right.
Can you speak a bit about, there'll be other opportunities. Could you speak about the other opportunities that are coming? Because it's feeling, to some
Pressure.
people, like it's rushed.
Yeah.
Especially now that there might be some expanded bridle trail, I think you called it, opened up. And so what opportunities are you foreseeing down the road beyond this first workshop?
So we do have a section on outreach later in the meeting, so I wonder
Okay.
if we could
Okay,
wait for
just
that.
defer it. That's coming.
But we do have many future
Yep.
opportunities.
I just don't want there to be the perception that we got to figure it all out.
No, not at all.
4 weeks.
I think the 4 weeks, just to share a little bit about that, because we do want everyone who's listening to come, it's really to share many possible futures and to give people a sense of what they should be really thinking about. But the hope is that people keep coming back and there's a continued conversation. So this is just really the launching in addition to these conversations we're having with you all.
Thank you.
So do we have any other questions for
'Cause we
what
should
was
keep going.
already discussed?
Just my final point on the parking is just that when we are, so we're starting 23A Road, and then when 23A Road is finished, we have two-way traffic, coming in and coming out, which is the goal. And so if we want to, I just think we need to make sure that we start our parking discussion, because we're going to have to get approvals and all that stuff so that that work can happen and come online shortly after the road is finished. So we don't just wait until the road's finished and then,
No, we're definitely taking that approach.
Okay,
For
great.
sure, for sure. Ted, I just have one last question. I was really interested in the tidal marsh projection. Did you say you got that from our plan?
Yeah, that's a town of Darien study.
Great. Okay.
It was commissioned the town of Darien commissioned it through the Nature Conservancy.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, I had a question about that as well. Is any of the current infrastructure that we're planning to utilize or repurpose in that?
No, I mean,
I think so. It
it's
looked
basically
like-
continuous with the 100-year floodplain, more or less, right? So no, to the extent that all of the infrastructure currently is outside, well, the planned infrastructure. I think that the beach houses are a
I
little
saw that,
more
yeah.
problematic.
You lost your connection.
Yeah, I can see that. Just trying to fix it.
on the road that comes in, the red line there, I heard the utilities, electric comes in Great Island Road, which is the easement, right? And then was there a sewer that goes under the road that we're rebuilding right now? Or does any utility go under that road? Or is it all-
Brian.
Does it-
Yes. Craig. Ed.
Yes, it appears there's sewer.
Yeah.
In the entry drive, sewer and water.
Is any,
There's sewer and there's some communications.
is any of that, is the sewer being examined as far as size and everything, as far, so that,
So the sewer that has been set aside for the island is actually in Great Island Road. There's 2 empty PVC pipes that were installed in the early 90s that were specifically installed to serve Great Island. The stuff in 23A was really to serve the potential lots along 23A.
okay, so anything we do on the island, we can access sewer from either Ziggy's Way or Great Island Road?
The Great Island Road cul-de-sac is where you would do the tie-in for the island.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I'm George Knight with Knight Architecture. Thank you very much for letting me speak. Ted spoke beautifully, I thought, about the richness of the ecology on the island, which I think is manifest to anyone who visits. And I would say equally manifest is the richness of the man-made out there. And in fact, one of the things that I find strikingly beautiful and really powerful about visiting the island is the way in which the two interact, the natural and the man-made. And I think it's the case that you have at Great Island some really extraordinary architecture that I think is, extraordinary construction, extraordinary design. I think says a lot about the development of your town, and I think also provides lots of provocative opportunities for ways in which you might adapt and reuse it for different purposes, ones that would be beneficial to your citizenry. So my firm is going to be looking carefully at the buildings on the site, and here we see a map of those buildings in black. We're going to pay particular attention to the 5 or 6 buildings. Most of them are the stone buildings of the sort of core of the Ziegler development of the property. The stables would surely be the first and foremost of that group. The greenhouse itself, the carriage house, the estate house, and then we're also going to look at the boathouse. And Monica asked us to take a closer look at the White House, which by all reports is the oldest structure on site. We were there today and had a really interesting first sort of scratching at it.
It's just that little side building, right?
There's a standalone building that I think is actually modern.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think it's that. I think that there's an older building, fragments of an older building within the core of that White House. But we were up in the attic crawling around. We were in the basement crawling around. It's mostly modern construction, let's say, 20th century construction. So I think there may be some older foundations, but we need to look more closely at it to establish, what. And then I think there's a lot of, Federal Revival, Colonial Revival architecture that's been brought back to it in the, again, 20th century.
We'll put you in touch with the previous owner. He actually lived in that house.
That's
so
fantastic.
He'll be able to steer you for sure.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And so that's exactly really our first set of activities is going to be to study the histories, plural, of these various buildings to better understand, what their origin and their adaptation, which interestingly is quite significant. So we think about the manor house, and what we see today is just radically different than what it was originally. And we found some, this is new to me, photographs over here. Monica's given me a big box full of drawings, so we're going to be, spending some really enjoyable time looking at the history of these buildings. We've already been in touch with your library and had some helpful directions from them. We've been in touch with your museum. Hopefully they'll be able to fill in. But we want to make sure that we understand as much as possible about the buildings themselves as we go into this assessment and analysis. We're going to be looking at, again, the number of these buildings in very careful way. We're also going to be paying attention to their current state. I think it's going to be valuable to you to understand where they stand or don't stand, as it were, and that will surely inform your thinking about the investment and those buildings that would be influenced towards one use or another. So we're going to be, carrying out, working with a specialty subconsultant that we work with frequently, assessments of things like building envelopes and roofing and windows and doors and things like that. So we have an understanding of where the buildings actually stand. We are also going to do, which is something that is for us really essential, because as architects, I think one of the things that we do is more or less create a facsimile of the building for ourselves in drawing form, and in this case, digital model form. So we're going to be working with a firm that has these extraordinary toys and tools that can help us create these facsimile visualizations and measured drawings. So again, we can be very precise in documenting and recording current state of affairs, recommended repairs and alterations, and testing potential alternate uses that have spatial implication. We'll be able to do that with a high level of accuracy. And this will also be secondarily, I think, a great resource to the town history. And you will have a really quite sophisticated set of documents that will tell you what these buildings are at the time of this survey. And ultimately, we want to document these buildings. We want to assess their state. We want to evaluate their cultural and artistic significance, to humankind, to the town of Darien. And then, as a matter of sort of synthesis, we want to work with you all, with the team, to test adaptation and alternate uses, and to make sure that we can devise a investment that you all feel will be a great return for your town. So we really look forward to working with you all and preparing these over the course of the coming weeks and months. Thank you.
Question, just in terms of process, will you be assessing those structures en masse and then talking about them all at one time, or will you do a piecemeal where maybe you'll dig into the great house or then the stables or then some of the smaller structures? Is there a thought as to when those discussions will take place?
Well, I think our research, we want to do it as quickly as possible so we know as much as possible as we start to come to decision points about what would be a worthwhile use here or there. So we're going to try to do it all at once, again, on these core buildings that we identified. And we can share about it and focus, which I'm sure is going to be the case. Like, we can probably focus on one or another given the demands of your conversations and actions that we need to take. But we're going to try to get our arms around the whole thing as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Thanks, George.
Good evening. Great to see everybody again. I'm Ben Margolis. I'm a principal with James Lima Planning and Development, my colleague Carrie. And so there are three interrelated topics that will be supporting your decision-making around, and then we'll do that pretty much in order, right? Programming, funding, and governance or management of operations. We're activating an extraordinary property here, and here are some of the variables on this slide and questions that we'll use together to sort of generate ideas and filter ideas, starting with who is this park for? And I think we've been told pretty clearly that residents are front and center. What uses or really benefit from its very unique location, a very isolated location. We start from the reality of that location. And, sort of taking ourselves through these sort of questions and variables. The great thing is that we're not starting from a blank slate. You guys have already done, and the town has already done a lot of thinking or early thinking and brainstorming around uses. Don't get too, fixated on the particular use ideas here, but you want to kind of think about the spectrum of uses, right? And one big area we'll do work together on is maximizing public enjoyment and finding any necessary revenue generation. These things are often thought about in conflict, but we want to encourage you to also consider where these things actually meet. So the stables, for example, we walked the building today. I can tell you from one walk that hospitality operators and developers are going to be very, very interested in this building. But when I say hospitality, so here's an example of where we want to find and explore every option. Don't just think about a private hotel when I say hospitality. Think about where public and private uses come together. A residency program, for example, is a form of hospitality. Even a hotel can be where private and public services and amenities come together. If you've stayed at a Grand Hotel before, its lobby is an example of what's called a third place, and that's kind of a planning lingo term. But third place just simply means that, where public and private come together. So if you've been in a lobby where there's a restaurant and there's amenities and it's a meeting place and there are services provided, information provided, that's an example of even where a private or partially private use could also be public facing. And that's where we want to kind of err on this spectrum. Financing, so programming will generally drive this. What we want to do is, as we get down the line in filtering and really focusing on programming in particular parts, structures on the island, particular parts of the island, this will become clearer about what form of financing and sources of financing we need to figure out and generate revenue for. And that runs the spectrum from public to earned income to private. We talked about a lot of this during the interview process. But this, again, is just sort of the process and the questions we'll keep in front of ourselves as we hone in on programming ideas. And then what we do finally is sort of solve for governance at the end of this equation. And we consider what type of management structure or entity based on both the programming that we settle on and the amount of financing required and the sources of financing required. So programming complexity, for example, will drive in some ways the type of organization that's going to eventually manage and operate either all or part of the island. Just one simple example.
So we thought there might be some questions or comments now.
Could you go back the slide before? I'm sorry, my prescription isn't quite big enough. What is the second square in the light blue middle? Family?
Facility rentals and
facility
events.
rentals, okay.
Yep. So two examples of how you could earn income on
Okay.
the island that could be captured and dedicated and earmarked for particular uses. But the more of that you do, the more complexity there might be, right, in terms of management and operations, or the type of organization that would eventually take over that, or at least steward that type of use.
The headline for each one of these is interesting, but the kind of alluding to your point, the devil's in the details in terms of how that works. Public-private partnerships can get messy, third parties can get messy, financing gets messy, all of that. Particularly if we're going to take public input as to potential ideas that might intersect with some of what you're discussing, feels to me like there would have to be some education about the nature of those options, so you could get sort of informed feedback, and maybe just more broadly in terms of some of the input that you're seeking in these upcoming sessions. I'm just kind of curious about that education point, as whether there's any value in trying to frame some of these in such a way that people have enough information to react, or enough information to say, yeah, I think that's a good idea, but I understand what that means if you do that.
100%, yes.
I
And
can just say hotel, because you could get excited about that, but there's a lot to that.
Exactly. And there are many types of management structures and conservancies versus the public sector taking a role. 100% yes. I think the 21st is the first opportunity to do that education, and that usually comes in the form of real-world examples. What do we mean by a conservancy? What do we mean by a public-private partnership? Where has that been put into place, and why? Where has it been successful? Where hasn't it been? So taking these terms and really showing visuals and giving people a real sense of what we're talking about, yes.
And we are in the process of identifying, I can't remember what it is, but we've already done some testing of 30 potential options, and an effort to try and get differentiation and already cross-check against some of the other factors. But the idea is to choose maybe, let's say, 5 of those for the community event and sort of show if, for instance, in our last meeting we talked about a community swimming pool, and then even when we were today, it's like if you had a lifeguard and you could find a way to make the beach safe, just if we wanted to have swimming, what would it mean for the town of Darien to have swimming? And there's a pool scenario and there's a beach scenario, they're different, and then what is the governance that follows and the financing that follows? So I think it's clear that looking at some hospitality or convening solution and the revenue is important, because we know there's a lot of interest, not just in the town, but for even the wider market in understanding what that would mean. And so we know there has to be some test fit. The community may say that isn't the future that we want for this island, but we're aware, just as an example, that those are 2 options that we're going to probably look fairly closely at and demonstrate what comes with them. And then I think what we'll also do, maybe not fully because it may start to seem too complicated at this point, but it's like if you decide you want just walking paths and maximizing ecology and low cost and low complexity, and you want a hotel, for instance, if we took those 2 things together, what would that look like? So we're not sure how many of those matchups we might do, but we'll speculate a little bit about that too with the community. Yes.
To John's point, and I like what I'm hearing, I think it'd be helpful for us and helpful for the community that these presentations are almost like a series of if-then statements and flow charting and explaining that, if you decide to have A, B, and C on this island, typically, not exclusively, but typically, that's run through a conservancy and it's privately funded or this or that, and it relates to our ability to be public-led and how, because I think there will be a feeling in the community, certainly on the front end, where the community has paid for this island, that they're going to want to feel that they have real input on the future and governance of it, as certainly in these initial months and years.
Absolutely. I think what our job right now is to provide people the tools to learn and then to make very informed decisions, and because everything is a trade-off, especially when it comes to programming, financing, and governance. But
hey guys,
Go ahead, Jim, we can hear you.
Hey guys, I just had a question related to this event on the 21st and the community events. Like, how are we as a committee going to decide what some of these options around public-private partnerships or other sort of examples of what could be, how are we going to decide on what we're actually showing to people on the 21st? Like, how are we going to arrive at that sort of subset of things that we want to receive their feedback on?
Do you want me to respond to that?
Can you guys hear me? Or?
Yeah, everybody is thinking, so sorry. I think, this is Becca. I think we will share a preview, and I think potentially we will, I would like to get more feedback of this, so this is an unrehearsed response, but I think we, meaning Reed Hildebrand, can share a whole set of scenarios in advance with you all, and then, as I said, I think what is most important is to share an array that feels within what's realistic for the community. So we will probably share more than is deemed realistic with you. And I think the question probably between now and then is, how much time do we need to do enough due diligence to give you something that is sound, which is probably something like almost 3 weeks. And then I think we should have some kind of process, and I'll work with Monica on that, for you to give us feedback, so we can narrow what we put fully out. And like, this is a public meeting, like, the idea that we would not distribute everything is that it's much more fun to have focused conversations. It's like, even when you have people over, you don't offer them 19 things for dinner, you give them, a couple of options, and that is what produces more shared value and like more productive conversation. So we want an array to have a full and deep conversation, but we don't want to put every single possible future on the table.
In fact, I think that's a great strategy, and I think that's why if we're only going to be showing a sort of subset, like we're not going to be showing every potential possible item, it would be good. I think maybe we as a committee should really kind of think hard with you about what are the things we're actually going to show and suggest, because they probably need to be within the realm of things that we as a committee believe that we could maybe afford or would support and so forth.
Totally agree. So let me get with Monica about what is the best process for how we do that.
But I would say that I think we don't want our community to think that we are handpicking what we're going to be showing. So I think that an array, a wide spectrum, with then with your input, with this A, these are the ramifications, the consequences. B is a little bit less. So think broad so that we can narrow down, but I don't want to start with a small subset and this is what the committee is thinking, and we're gonna work with this group.
Monica, I completely agree with you. I think that's why, just back to what Becca said, if we're just going to show a subset, let's just make sure that subset is something that we all believe, we'll elicit the right feedback and from the community.
Well, the subset also has to include stuff we've all heard people talking about. People have asked about a pool. People have asked about an ice rink. People have asked about playing fields. And so there's a discrete list of things that we've all kind of heard about, and you got to put those on the table. And if we have to say, we've studied this and this particular one's non-viable for these reasons, then that's an opportunity to educate people so that they start to get that out of their mind. But I think it'd be a mistake not to include the ones that we've heard people ask about, and we know what those are.
Yeah.
And Ben's slide a few back, the one with the vertical graph, had quite a diverse offering on it. So, I mean, if that's a preview of the types of things that we're gonna ask about.
Yeah, these are some of the things we've already started.
These are actually some of the things that people, we wanted to make sure, as I said, we're not starting from a blank slate. It's incredibly important to show participants that come on the 21st that they've been heard, and that but we are also putting those ideas on a spectrum. We're not just picking them, they're not just laying out there. They all have ramifications, and they're all going to cause, really specific questions that we're going to have to answer together.
And perhaps as a committee, and we can advise the public that as we go through these choices, like we see on the slide, to give them a view of our vetting process, which obviously, to the extent that they attend meetings or watch on Zoom or whatnot, they can see. So when they look and they see their idea, they can know, well, all right, well, the committee is going to look at it in terms of cost and effective nature and practicality and whatever those factors are, so they can know at the other end, if it doesn't come out the way they want it for their particular vision, they'll know what the factors were that got to
and what our process and variables were. And that's what this slide, let's not just say, I'm not saying these are exactly the variables that we'll use. These are variables and questions we've used in other projects and other open space programming projects, right? And we know that other communities have dug into But absolutely, I think that's what we're sharing tonight, is the process of how we would generate and filter ideas, because we're going to have to filter those ideas rather quickly, right? We can't take 6 months, and bandy about every idea in the world. We've got to start moving, because everything else is sort of dependent on us filtering down programmatic ideas for particular structures and places on the island.
Still, this is only the first workshop of a
Absolutely.
number and other types of
Correct.
events, so this isn't the decision-making point.
This is the starting
This is-
point, as I said.
Get them thinking,
Yeah.
so that they can come to the next one.
And ask the right
and provide
questions,
good-
right? Yep.
Like you said, Ben, I think one of the real important things is that a brainstorming session is great, but I think also it's going to be important for people to understand as early as the brainstorming session what the consequences are of putting an ice rink or a pool or a this or a that.
He's definitely gonna cover that.
Oh, I heard him say it. I'm just saying I'm putting a second stamp on that. I think it's hugely important.
And I think the Reed Hildebrand team will work. I think that's a really interesting way of maybe it's actually visually showing that, right? We can kind of play with ways to do that.
And Ben, I used the word filter, and so whatever ultimately gets presented, whether it's 10 or 20 or whatever, having this group involved I think is important, because someone's going to ask about the 10 that never made it to the presentation.
Yeah.
And if we're at least aware, we
And
could
it
try to
may be
address
something
those
that we
same
can share with
questions.
you. I didn't mean to, I apologize, just interrupted Mark. It's possible that we can also show, these are all the things the community has asked for. These are the things that we've tested. These are the ones that we're bringing forward because they're complementary to each other, right? So there are certain things like, if the stables are the building that are like in the best condition that can support the greatest intensity of use, where there's parking and there isn't really sensitive ecology, just as an example. And again, we're doing due diligence, and I haven't discussed that with George, and there's a lot of work. But that as an early informal finding, the stables were just in public service, right, or public use, so they're in pretty good shape, and it's a big building, and there's access to it. So that's like a building where there's a lot of possible uses, but they're not, if you want a rink, it might go there, and then maybe you can't also have a hotel there, right, as an example. And so I think some of the things that we'll be showing is, if you really care about this, given the wetlands, given some of the other regulations, you have to make a choice about the purpose for this building. And these are the sensible choices for that building. So I think we're going to try and help people connect the dots, so to speak, because certain things in a Venn diagram want to kind of go together, and some just can't be mated. So if that's helpful.
That is.
Great.
We hired professionals.
Yes, yes. And we, just to come back to that, we want everyone to feel like you all have led this town and community to the best future for this island. That's why we all do what we do. So we're not interested in foreclosing anything. We want everyone to understand the process, and we will show our work, but we don't want to overwhelm people or put them to sleep by all the detail. So we want to bring forward things that are interesting and convincing and foster good kind of conversation.
It looks like you actually went through maybe the plan of conservation and development. Some of those ideas were in the plan, so. But you know what, I'm going to suggest, because we have a hard stop, we lose the room at 7:30, so I'm going to suggest that we keep moving, but if we want to call a special meeting because we don't get through everything tonight,
Sure.
we can always do that.
We will I think we will get through everything. I think the next section, just to share, this was really, really helpful, and exactly the conversations that we wanted to have today. So if we keep going. Oh, I guess actually just go back, because I think we maybe skipped over this. So this is just as an example of some of the things we started to look at, just to feed your curiosity, in terms of, for instance, a skating rink, how you might think about where it might go. Just those are, and again, there's a lot of questions, there are a lot of possible challenges related to FEMA or otherwise, but the sort of size, footprint, and what potentially makes sense in terms of access. If you, I think, back up, because we did maybe go. if we want to have like an adventure playground, which generally wants some topography, some nice trees, good surveillance from parents, a nice easy place to hang out and be with your kids or play with them or not. Those are some of the areas that seem to lend themselves to that. If you go to another one, I think something that we've been really interested in is what are the areas that support large community gatherings and sort of festivals, but don't require a huge amount of architectural support, so maybe they're weather or season dependent, but what are those spaces, what are the buildings that they're next to, what might you imagine, what's the sort of cycle of those next. And then I think, again, just sort of, we've started to categorize some of the structures by uses that tend to go. So like if you have a museum or you want an art center, there's a certain size that you need. Similarly, like with a hotel, you need a certain number of parking. There's just a set of things. So some of the buildings are quite small, and because they're small, it limits what's an appropriate use. And I do think, at least where we're starting at the moment, is how do we make sense of what you have? So it's not at all to say that there won't be new structures or there won't be something that doesn't exist that gets added to the island, but right now we're focused on how do we make use of what you have and what do those structures support more or less in their current state with renovation, I should say, and adaptation.
I think those are the test fits.
Yes, those are our test fits. So I forgot that, I guess, I think we didn't assign responsibility for who was speaking to this, so sorry. Now Megan's going to talk about outreach.
So I'll just speak quickly on this because I know I'm mindful of time and I want to make sure that we have capacity and time to address any last questions relative to the discussion today. So as it relates to our community engagement and our outreach, this is where we are within our schedule. We have these two phases of the vision plan and the master plan and concept. Right now we are working towards our first workshop, Discovery and Understanding, on September 21st, which has already been discussed. As part of that, we will be engaging in experiential opportunities with the public, where we're going to be giving tours. And then we're also going to be creating our focus groups, which will be basically meeting with key members of the community to discuss topics like recreation, circulation, parking, ecology, all of those key important things that we want to make sure that we capture feedback for. You go to the next slide. This is the agenda for the meeting on September 21st. We're going to be doing two sessions. The first will be here at Town Hall in the morning from 10:15 to 12:30. Essentially, it'll be an introductory presentation about the team, the project, where we are at. It'll involve some community engagement boards and activity stations, and I'll explain those in a minute. And then the afternoon session is going to be actually on Great Island. So there will be a shuttle from Pear Tree Point Beach to the stables. We'll be giving guided walks and tours through the island, and then we'll also be having workshop boards and activity stations, and then a shuttle back to Pear Tree Point Beach. We're looking at maybe having like a ice cream food truck or something, just to keep people's blood sugar levels high, so people are, having a good time. Just to touch on the topic of tours at Great Island, we have 5 themes that we're going to be focusing on: ecology and nature, history and architecture, water and recreation, programming and fun facts, and then also a children's tour. So that's how we'll organize and structure the tours. Relative to workshop boards and activity stations, these are 4 boards from a project that we did in Hartford at Elizabeth Park that give you a sense of how we might actually provide information and education with the public as a way for them to engage and learn about the project. So for this particular project, we had 4 boards that were about programming, history and architecture, ecology and natural systems, and then also access. So we'll be taking a path very similar to this. We'll have boards that are very similar, that are up on easels that the public can read and engage with. And we'll be having people at the boards speak to the boards and present the information on the boards. You go to the next slide. This is just kind of a zoomed in one as a sample outreach board that talks about some of our initial observations and site analysis. And of course, that'll be relevant to Great Island. It'll also speak to any activity questions that the public might have. And if you go to the next slide, we'll also have maps and interactive activities where the public can come up to some of the boards and be asked interactive questions. They can write comments on sticky notes and stick it on the boards. It gives us a really fantastic opportunity to hear directly from the community as we're engaging with them. One additional tool that we have found to be highly effective when we're doing our community outreach is doing a survey. So this is a digital survey, it's an online survey, and we send out a link and a QR code. And so what we'll likely have is a board as part of this community engagement session that's all about how to find out about Great Island. And there will be a QR code that you can scan, and it'll give you the link to a survey, and you can answer whatever it may be, 10 to 15 questions about your understanding of Great Island, what you envision for Great Island, what you might like to see at Great Island, what you think some of the key priorities might be. And all of that is something that we will preview with you. Those questions will be previewed with you prior to it being circulated and distributed. And then those responses, again, will be something that we preview with you prior to any information being, circulated, so that you all have the opportunity to really digest it and understand it firsthand.
Maybe sticking with the, you don't have to.
Oh,
We can talk. But
okay.
sticking with the survey, are you sending it to the whole community or just people who go to on the tour?
I think we can do it however you see fit. In many ways, probably the whole community is ideal. That way you're really hearing from your entire true community, and we think that that's beneficial.
We're about to talk about the website, and I think probably what we'll do is we'll launch this all at the outreach event, and then all the boards and everything will go onto the website and be sort of digestible. And we have found that a lot of people want to reflect, or they want to go and talk, and they don't want to fill it out right there. Some people love to just get it done, and other people want to take their time. And so all the information will go live on the website, and we'll probably keep the survey open for something like 3 weeks. We'll want to have processed it before we next meet, because I think it's important on the cadence of these meetings to say, this is what we heard. So we'll want to have some urgency for people, but it's nice to give people a little bit of time. So I think that's how we'll do it. But again, we're sharing this, we're not asking for you to vote, yay, that's good too. We're just sharing that that's our preferred way probably to go ahead with that. We can talk about it more.
Parking Rec, when they do surveys, how long do they leave them open?
It was about 3 weeks.
It's pretty typical. Every once in a while, there's a reason to keep it open longer, but I think with how we're trying to keep things moving, I think we don't want to leave it open too often,
Yeah, but if
too long.
the wider net we can
Yeah.
spread, the
So,
better.
so Beck, on that website, you mentioned the boards and things. Is there a way to get the experiential, the tours, the events
That's
on there? I don't know if Channel 79 films it, or you folks film it, or a group from the high school or Boy Scouts, video club.
Let's
to supplement.
Let's accept that question and see how we can answer it.
Yeah.
You accepted one, Mike.
I accept that question. I don't want to answer it if that's okay, because I think, I'm sure there is a way. I think it was off the cuff, but I'm glad it's okay.
It's going to get reused.
So here's a sort of sample. We're going to circulate a link to you after this meeting for you to start playing around. It's quite a basic website right now because we're just launching it and starting to add material. I think in some ways we are motivated to keep it a fairly straightforward website and not to fill it with bells and whistles, but to have it be really focused. And that's part of what's motivating my hesitation, because as soon as we start adding layers of complexity to the website, you need someone to be tasked with monitoring and fixing it and responding to people a lot, and that's actually human infrastructure that gets to, I think, what came up as a question, which is complexity about how much labor and effort goes into the constant interaction.
I appreciate that. Where that came from is your opening comments, I agree with 100%. You have to be on the island to understand the island. And so for the vast majority of the community that's not going to make it into that workshop.
I think the idea...
no video's going to do it justice, let's be honest.
Right. Yeah, but I think the idea of some videos is a beautiful idea, and I think we should do whatever we can to make that happen, whether or not they relate to exactly what happens, for instance, on the 21st.
Right.
I mean, I think I also we don't know, to everyone who's listening, we want you all there. We're really hoping more than 50 people come. I know last time you had 600 people, we are sensitive to the fact that we need to be prepared for everything, and I think I don't want to commit us to also filming and doing all sorts of
Understood.
additional things where we really want to be there to answer people's questions and sort of offer a human touch. So videos on the website in some capacity, I'll say yes to that,
Right.
but maybe not.
And Monica, that's why I was asking, supplement with folks from town, just casually
Right.
videotaping,
Right, we can talk.
not impose on limited resources.
I do want to just talk to the bus thing, so it won't be exactly like it was for the bus tour earlier. So what we're looking at doing is renting two school buses, like same kind of bus that we had for the other tour. They each can hold 54 people, so that's 108 people. That group will be taking to the island, and then the bus will come back if there are additional people that need to be picked up. So the max that we will have for bus service is 216 people. Okay, so that's 2 buses, 2 trips. And Karen and Linda will be handling this from Town Hall. We will be getting a press release out on this, and it will be by reservation. So it'll be kind of the same setup that we had before. And we are encouraging kids, that's what that whole ice cream thing is about, but that goes into the head count for the buses. So, and of course, you don't need a bus to get to Town Hall, so I hope people will come to that meeting. You can come to that meeting and then come to the island later if you want, that also will work. Or you can decide the day up and come to the event. So the most important takeaway from all of that is come to the event. That's what
Yes.
I'm asking.
Come.
We're really excited to be able to have the public come and join us.
What just, I guess, in looking at the morning and the afternoon, it's going to be clear to people what the nuances are, so they know, like, do I need to do both? Would I rather do this one or that one?
They'll be identical.
They'll be identical, it's basically the same.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
There'll be no food truck here, but there'll be coffee in the morning.
Well, so there's no tour, so,
And
I mean, when you
nobody
read the
walks.
2 sessions, to me, when I looked at it earlier today, when we got they felt different the way this is presented. I was wondering, how are people going to decide?
So we can add more clarity, and I think that's great feedback as we think about the press release. We wanted to offer the 2 options because we do want as much input as possible. It's very easy for people to come to Town Hall. We know that. And so doing it here means there's no challenge for anyone in terms of access or getting to the island and not having their car. And we knew that some people might want to pop in, not for the whole thing, just for part of it. So that's why we're doing the Town Hall. Because of the experience of being on the island is so important, we also wanted to do it there. And for a while, we were going to do both morning and afternoon on the island, and we decided that for some people, they would just opt to not come. And we want to make everybody feel welcome to participate in this, so that's why we've simplified it and we have the 2 locations. The information will be exactly the same, the experience will be different, and I agree when you look at that, you can't tell that
Okay, I
difference.
think it'd be great to clarify that, I'll help people make their choice.
Yeah, I think that's great. So I'm
Let's
also,
take his question and then we'll come back to the brand.
Just as far as just logistics, let's say when you get off the bus, if we've got, 108 people, will someone be directing traffic? So you say, okay, these people are going to go on their tour first, and then these people are going to go into the stables. So
Yes.
it's a rolling thing. It's not like all 108 are doing the same thing.
First, all will hear a presentation, and then some people can stay and mingle around the tables, others can do the walk and come back and mingle around the tables, or you can hear the presentation, and if you want to leave. The buses will take people at the end of the event, but if you want to leave earlier and you want to walk over to Pear Tree and get your car, that's great. Okay, now we're going to cover the social media.
Yeah, so just quickly, we're just showing a snapshot here of, this is kind of a teaser of the website that we're building. So, on the one site, it's going to be, basically, it'll have drop-down menus where it talks about Great Island, it talks about the project, it has frequently asked questions. So this is just a quick snapshot to show you that this is in development. And then for our branding and identity, this is actually quite a long section, so we might just need to move through this quickly, given time. So the goal here for the Great Island Vision Plan's identity is that it aspires to highlight the rich conservation and ecological potential of the island and in doing so, appear both elegant and friendly. And so you'll see that we're showing two different versions of the branding and the logo, but both are really meant to focus on the ecology and the potential of Great Island. So in the first one, we're looking at habitats of Great Island. So we're really bringing into focus the 5 major ecological zones. If you go to the next one, this is something that Ted spoke about earlier, the grasslands, coastal forest, salt marsh, tidal flats, and rocky shoreline. We've taken that and distilled that into a graphic that shows approximate size relative to the ecology, and that really is distilled into this resulting mark that we've created as a distinctive G, right, that's meant to represent Great Island. So the next slide shows you how we're thinking about that in terms of branding. And this is what we are currently putting forward as the Great Island Vision Plan brand. So if you keep going, this is just a couple of pages that look at our community engagement strategies and how we are representing that. Keep going. I think, you can just go a little bit faster. One of the options here is also talking about the habitats of Great Island. So if you go to the next slide, again, we have the opportunity to represent that in a different way, again, using the G, but bringing art forward, bringing different ecologies forward, using different graphics to talk about our community engagement, the Vision Day Plan, keep going. And then here are examples of pamphlets that we could potentially put together for workshops. Go to the next one. We also think there's an opportunity with this patterning to perhaps speak to the architecture of the building relative to patterning, and if you go to the next slide, perhaps have some type of banners. These are examples of some of the workshop boards we might use. Keep going. We really like the idea of having a map of the island. We think that's really critical to the success of the project, so we'll be working on that, and having basically on the website what the graphics might be relative to the Great Island Vision Plan. So again, the graphics here talk about the architecture, it talks about the salt marsh, it talks about the coastal line, it talks about the ecology, it's got the woodland. So it's really meant to be all encompassing and representative. If you go to the next, we see opportunities for badge icons that you might be able to use, custom artwork on t-shirts and hats. The potential for signage, stickers, coloring books. And again, this ranges both from kind of classic to slightly more modern in terms of its graphics. This is the next version that's a slightly more simplified.
And let's just pause because I think we can share this whole package with you so that, because we're not asking for a decision. The point is that we've been exploring we looked at 4 to 5 options, maybe even 6. And the one that Meg just walked through is, I think, our favorite because it's the most flexible. It can tune classic. It can also tune very forward. And we love the way it captures photos and pictures. There's another sort of, in some ways, more traditional option that we're looking at. So we'll circulate the sort of full set with you guys, and then we look forward to getting your feedback. We are going to try and launch the website soon, but it's basically ready to go, and we can elect with your feedback to add one of these, like the G or the other option, or just to use the sort of straight text and all the photos. So there's no pressure immediately about making a decision. So I think do you agree with that, Monica?
But why don't you go through the other one really?
Okay,
do you guys have, can we
got
borrow
a minute?
Okay, so speed review.
Okay, so this looks at combining elements of the island, the architecture, the sea, the forest, the wildlife into a classic pennant shape. So this is this idea of there being a flag for Great Island that you might be able to deploy. Keep going. Again, this talks about images relative to the beauty and the natural character, how we might bring forward that pennant that captures all of those components of the site. Here we're looking at really celebrating the flora and the fauna within the graphics in this option. Here are some other ideas about, some of the pendants that we might deploy, potential for flags for Great Island, for workshop materials. This is what this option might look like. And so that gives you a good sense for comparison. It's a really speed version that's very painful to present, doesn't do justice to the design whatsoever, but we do want you just to understand that there's a lot of thought that's been in this, and I think you can look at this separately and come to your own conclusions.
It's more, I would say, like a camp or a school or a community versus something that's more like open or a little bit more abstract. So just really simple, and we look forward to more feedback from you on those two options.
Okay, so we will, can we give them this whole presentation?
Yes.
Okay, all right,
Yes.
all right. And that's something that we don't need to make a decision on tonight?
We don't need to make a decision on it tonight, no. I think we will share the, the website with you guys in its draft form to get feedback, and we'll share this, and then we'll solicit feedback. And again, like how we design for feedback when we don't have a full meeting, because we're on our monthly cadence, we'll get the feedback.
We can also call a meeting, which
That's,
we
yeah.
we might need to do.
I think there is, I think just to share, we don't want to be a burden on your guys' schedule, but there is so much involved in getting this off on the right footing. So if we impose on your time, it's really just to make sure that we do everything right as we're starting off.
Please do.
Yeah, please don't hesitate.
We want to be available.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're available.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Virtual or otherwise.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've done a lot of work, so it's just a question of like, how do we make it so we can actually have a conversation versus be like, it's a fire hose and just overwhelm you with content. So thank you for your attention and engagement today.
So I think our next meeting is right before.
Yes.
And so what I might suggest is look at the calendar like a week or two earlier and we try to get something done.
I think that's good.
Okay. Okay, so with that said, we have to get the room. So I want to thank you for a terrific presentation and give us a really think about it. And we're going to talk about our next meeting.
Yes.
All right?
Outstanding. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion to adjourn. Mike moves. Mark?
Second.
All right.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.